We're going to take a look at the photosynthesis workbook here. You've gotten a couple lessons already in class. You've tried to do them in class, the questions. You've you have them in your email. You should be reading them and trying to answer the questions as you go along. I'm here just to try to help you with the more complicated parts. So if we take a look at the first page, what we see is that the key points here, that the parts indicated in red are key facts, and they're going to be on the test for sure. The blue indicates some background information. Okay, it's not going to be directly on a test, but it might be important for you to know. For instance, for the OGT, you'll see the kinds of that topic, that background information again. The green stuff is advanced information. You really don't need to know it at this level. If you feel like you're ready to go ahead and learn it, I would learn it. You'll see it again in AP biology and certainly in college biology. Okay, so the synoptic, this is kind of a light purple, light lavender. That's really just for areas, connections between other topics that we've covered in class. And this is more to do with the program that this gentleman, Brian, put together. But it's key that we try to remember that the red stuff's going to be on the exam. The blue material in blue is background information. The information in green is advanced, but it would be helpful to learn if you feel like you can. If not, just stick with the red and the blue. Specifically the red. The red's your first level knowledge that you're going to have to know for the exam. The blue is kind of a one tier up, okay, that you should understand and learn so you can maximize your performance on any exam that you may be given this year or next. And information in green is just an advanced level that should prepare you if you're ready to understand this at that really deep level that really is college preparatory. All right, let's go on and move on to the next. Okay, so let's look at this page 3 real quick. You'll see that here's some advanced material that we discussed a little bit before. We did touch on it, on the laws of energy of the universe, and talking about how things move from order to disorder, and entropy being the measurement of that disorder. But what we really want to look at here is these items in red, and the items in red really take into account all the things that are going to be on the test about photosynthesis. Kind of one by one, if you know these items, you're pretty clearly going to get those questions right on the test. Obviously, the big question is, the difference between autotrophs, heterotrophs, photosynthesis in general, and what living things use is energy, and what living things can use this energy for. So you really have to think about this stuff, all right? I think this is really important. I've mentioned this before. I think it's important for your standardized exams to remember that almost all life on Earth comes from the sun. That really you're either a heterotroph or an autotroph. But they do have these organisms that we talked about here. They're talked about in blue. That thermal energy from the Earth itself. There are only a few ecosystems known to use this as an energy source. Okay, and we've identified them, but they're not part of this solar ecosystem, right? They're not getting their energy from the sun, and so there is a portion of life that is separate from the cycle of getting the energy from the sun and then something coming and eating the thing that got the energy from the sun. So even though it's blue, I'm not going to test it on the test. Obviously, it's not a photosynthesis question, but it is something that could come up in an ecology question on ACT, or it could be an ecology question come up on the OGT. Something you should consider, and I might put on the final. Okay, so here's this big page, page 4, that talks about all the details of the electromagnetic spectrum. You covered that with Mr. DeCepeda. Remember, photosynthesis really just uses the visible light spectrum, and if you think about it, the only real part that the photosynthesis doesn't use is the green. the green and a little bit on either side of the green, and that would be obvious if you remember what does it mean when you see the color green. That means that light has been reflected back to your eye. So when we're talking about the colors, the visible light spectrum, you'll notice it's 400 nanometers to 700. But the key from this whole page is written right here in red. All right, this is what you need to know for the exam. On a bigger note, and something you should already understand and know, is that light can either pass straight through something, we call that transmission, reflect it, all right, or it can be absorbed by it. If it's absorbed, remember we talked about that, the electrons move up an energy level, and when they come back down, they release a photon. So light can be absorbed by an electron. It can also be released by that electron coming back down to its lower energy state. Okay, so we need something to be able to capture that light, to absorb that light. And that thing is known as a pigment. And these four qualities of the pigment are all listed right here. The first being colored pigments absorb different wavelengths of white light. For instance, the pigment in your shirt, if it's a red shirt, absorbs everything but red. Plants contain colored pigments absorb red and blue light very well. You can see it here on this chart. You'll see chlorophyll is the dark line. And if you take a look at it, you can see that the carotenoids, which is another one of those pigments you can read about here, is absorbing in the blue area here, in this little gap here, that this chlorophyll does not absorb. And you'll notice that this area is not being absorbed. The chlorophyll does not absorb in this area, but the carotenoids do. You'll see here in the orange, we have chlorophyll taking up some of the light, and we're getting really good at the red. The carotenoids are no longer useful at these wavelengths. But you'll also notice, if you take a close look at the graph, the part of the chart that's absolutely not being absorbed at all is this section of the green light between 502 or 3 or something like that, maybe 510 to around 555 or 502. Around there, this nanometer, this wavelength of light, this green light is not being absorbed by plants, and that's why plants are green, because that's the light that's being reflected. It's not being absorbed. Remember, there's only three things that three ways light interacts with material. It either passes through it, is reflected, or is absorbed. These small questions in the text, where they ask you questions like, what do photosynthetic organisms do with light energy? Those are the kinds of questions you should be thinking about as you're reading it. And I just explained to you the chart. If you take a look at, thinking about that explanation of the chart, it kind of explains the illustration above, which is to say that when you see white light coming in, white light is made up of all the colors of the rainbow: red, blue, green, indigo, violet. I skipped orange, but all Roy G. Biv, all the colors of the rainbow. As it hits something, blue and red light in the chloroplasts and the keratins, they get absorbed. Green is not absorbed. Green is reflected, and that's the point of this graphic here. Make sure you get these points here, these 1, 2, 3, 4 important points here. And something to think about, when radiation is absorbed, a lot of it is lost to heat, and that's why you'll see when you're wearing out in the sun in a black shirt, your black pigment is absorbing all the sunlight. And so since it's absorbing all the sunlight, it tends to get hotter because a lot of that absorption that's occurring is lost to heat. There is no perfectly efficient system as far as we've been able to discover. So the idea of heat being lost is normal, as you can tell when you touch the hood of your car after a drive, or when you're running around playing basketball. You can feel the heat coming off your body. That's energy that's being lost because our systems are not perfect. We're not able to transform the energy from one form to the other without losing some portion of it to heat. So when the black shirt absorbs the light, it loses some of that energy is lost to heat. It's absorbing so much light that it actually gets warmer than the white shirt. that reflects that light, so it's not absorbing as much light as the black shirt. Okay. All right, when we take a look at the photosynthetic organisms, here again, here's your points. You have to remember to try to remember to stick to those red, the red outlined and red sentences. They go through very clearly what is important, what isn't. Remember, with our chlorophyll, that's the pigment that's in the chloroplast. Remember, these are the steps of what's being absorbed and what isn't. This is the overall reaction. We've gone through this in a couple of videos now. You have the light-dependent stage. We've talked about that. That happens in the thylakoids. Those are stacked up little coin-looking things that are green inside the chloroplast. And then the light-independent stage, or the Calvin cycle, it's happening in the cytoplasm or in the stroma, right? Which is the kind of the cytoplasm of the chloroplast. It's not really cytoplasm because it's not a cell. But here you have glucose coming out. Of course, water, glucose is the main component that we're worried about when we're talking about photosynthesis. Of course, CO2 is going into the Calvin cycle to make that happen. Light is coming in to split water. Light is splitting water and releasing the electrons, increasing the electrons' energy, allowing for the concentration gradients to happen, just like in the mitochondria. Except when in the mitochondria, of course, you don't use light, you use glucose. Use all that energy that this process put into that molecule called glucose. Okay, let's look at the first set of questions here. What are the two main sources of energy on Earth that can drive ecosystems? Well, we know the sun is definitely one of them, and that's the main one that drives the two. Heterotrophs and autotrophs that we're familiar with, that just about every one on the planet is interacted with. But we also know that there are chemiosmotic organisms, or you have organisms in the bottom of the ocean that we've identified as really feeding off the heat of the earth and using that heat in various chemical reactions to create the energy, the chemical energy they need to survive. What are the technical terms for organisms that make their own food? Well, I hope by now you know that's autotroph. And organisms that obtain food through eating other things, I hope by now you know it's heterotroph. And I hope, by the way, that you have already gone through all these questions and tried to answer them, so that when I'm sitting here giving you the answers and walking you through some of the pages, I know I went quickly, but you can review them yourself and also review the videos I sent you before. As I'm giving you these answers, I hope you're checking yourself, and then you're studying them and getting ready for the exam. Why are plants green? Well, if you paid attention, you would have noticed, and you should have been able to see that plants have pigment called chlorophyll that absorb light, and carotenoids, they absorb light on the red and blue spectrum, but they don't absorb green light very well at all. So what you see is the light that's not absorbed, and that is green. The electromagnetic radiation of the sun, which types reach the Earth's surface? Well, the one we're concerned with, I hope you understand, is visible light, right? So it's visible light that we're really concerned with about that hits the Earth's surface. Of course, you do get some UV light hitting the Earth's surface, or we wouldn't tan, or we wouldn't have to worry about skin cancer. But a lot of that has to do with, or some of that has to do with the pollution that we're putting into the air that's affecting our ozone layer, because that ozone layer is what interacts with the UV light to help protect us. But in any case, it's the majority of the light energy from the sun that hits the Earth's surface that we're concerned with is the visible light, and almost all of that is absorbed by plants whenever they can absorb it, and except for green light, because the carotenoids and chlorophyll those pigments do not interact with green light, do not absorb green light. Why can plants absorb sunlight? Because of the ability of pigments the electrons in the pigments To be excited, electrons absorb photons, they absorb sunlight. We've seen that happen. I've showed it to you in the classroom. You're able to take those electrons and move them to a higher energy state because a photon comes in and hits and touches it or is absorbed by it. What normally happens to absorb sunlight by a plant, as I just said a minute ago, in general, absorb sunlight. Normally what happens is that light is absorbed by an electron. The electron's energy is excited, it moves up to a higher energy level, and when it relaxes back down, it releases that energy level, or that energy, in the form of another photon. So it's re-emitted. In terms of energy, plants change light energy into what type of energy? By now, I hope you understand they turn light energy into chemical energy. What products are made from photosynthesis? I hope you understand that the products are oxygen and sugar, specifically a 3-carbon sugar that can make all kinds of different carbon compounds, but glucose is the end product for the most part. What raw materials are required for photosynthesis? Well, water, sunlight, and oxygen. Carbon dioxide. Oxygen is being produced. The source of carbon for the sugar and the oxygen is the CO2. The source of the electrons and the energy is the breakup of water into oxygen by the sunlight. And by the way, that's what plants. This is the reason that plants. Why can plants absorb sunlight? Well, they can because of the chlorophyll. What happens to that absorbed sunlight? I mentioned ago the electrons move up in energy level, but plants actually use this to break up the water into oxygen and allow an electron to have more energy, and use that electron then to move the hydrogen ions that we discussed before that allow for ATP synthetase to make ATP. That ATP then can be transformed into glucose later in the dark reactions or the Calvin cycle. What products are made from photosynthesis? We already talked about that. What raw materials are required? Just said that. What is the waste product from photosynthesis? Well, I guess you'd have to say waste product is oxygen, right? So oxygen is being produced. It's not needed, so it's put out. What is the waste products? What is the waste product from photosynthesis? Well, I just answered that. And what do the two stages of photosynthesis do? Well, the first stage of photosynthesis, remember, are the light reactions. That's using photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. Remember that the whole point of the light reactions is to excite electrons to get the energy from the sunlight. So they capture the energy from the sunlight and transform them into energy that can be used in the Calvin cycle to make sugar. So we need to make ATP and NADPH, and we do that in the light reactions. All right, well, I hope that helped. We'll go over it again. Please go through the videos I sent before. I'll try to hit the second section tomorrow. All right, good luck.